Hello and welcome. I'm Mariana Almeida and this is McKinsey Talks, broadcasting directly from our studio in São Paulo. Today's topic is generative AI, which is truly groundbreaking as many companies are now seeking to move beyond initial pilots and scale up impactful use cases. In this session, we will unveil some remarkable cases where organizations have successfully overcome initial barriers in their journeys and started to expand the use of GenAI in their operations. Joining us to share these stories and to discuss the adoption of this technology worldwide is Alex Singla, Global Leader of QuantumBlack AI by McKinsey. Hi Alex, it's such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us is Pepe Cafferata, Leader of QuantumBlack AI by McKinsey in Latin America, who has been closely tracking the business landscape in our region during the GenAI race. Pepe, thank you very much for being back here.
Thanks for the invite.
Before we move on to this conversation, do you know McKinsey Talks? It's a series of video and podcast interviews of around 20 minutes with McKinsey experts and guests from different industries. Our aim here is to start interesting conversations on relevant topics on the business agenda. So let's get started. Alex, to kick off our conversation here, transitioning from pilots to scale is not a straightforward process. What are successful companies doing right worldwide in this regard?
I think it's a wonderful question, and I think it is the question for 2024, which is how do we go from proof of concept to true scaling? And those companies that I see scaling do lots of different things, and let me just name a few. The first is, they truly are solving a business problem. It is not tech for tech's sake. They're finding a business issue and they're understanding what role does technology, AI, and GenAI play in helping solve that problem.
It's not just a hype.
It's not just a hype, right? It's solving a real business problem that technology is part of the solution, but not the only solution often. The second thing is they prioritize. This is not an area to have 1,000 flowers blooming. It's an area in which you can focus, choose a couple of key areas to really reinvent, and then focus on your energies in those areas. And then I think the third thing that they do is they think about adoption and scaling from the very, very beginning. So it's very different to create a proof of concept than it is to create a solution that can adopt and scale. And one of the key factors there on those companies that do that well is they build the models and they build the processes to go along with it in a cost-efficient, scalable way. And so those kind of mindsets from the very beginning, I think, are just critical factors between those that live in proof of concept world and those that are scale. There's many more, but I just want to hit on a couple that I think are critical.
Great. And Alex, can you share with us some industries examples that have caught your attention so far?
So at least from a QuantumBlack perspective, I'd say the sectors that seem to be doing the most amount around AI and generative AI consistently be the life sciences space, the mining space, heavy industrial, so what we call advanced industry space, banking and insurance, and then consumer retail. And those 5 or 6 sectors seem to just continuously be accelerating in terms of how much they're leveraging AI and generative AI. And when I think about particular companies, it's really all around the world. I'm thinking about a big oil and gas company in the Far East in which they are doing amazing work reinventing how they optimize every step of their oil and gas processes. How they're getting oil out of the ground, how they're processing it, how they're distributing it, and leveraging generative AI and AI technology across that entire stream to optimize their performance. And they're seeing tremendous lift from that. And so not just economic lift, but their people are excited. They're focusing on the things that they have most passion for. And the people are learning and growing with technology in a world in which oil and gas might not be the number one thing one thinks about when they think about generative AI. But this organization is really leveraging technology and AI to do so.
And they are seeing value already, so.
Absolutely. They're seeing real economic lift in terms, in this world, 3, 4, 5% increases in effectiveness, in efficiency and optimizing getting the oil out of the ground is tremendously valuable. And so they're seeing that both in speed, but also in cost.
Pepe, what's the scenario in Latin America? How are your clients adopting and scaling GenAI?
So I think Many of the trends are similar to the one that Alex was describing. A few things in LATAM that I think are quite unique. The first one is many of the companies we work with are the local champions, where they have local owners, local boards, and the level of ambition we are seeing in these companies in terms of leading the AI revolution is huge, which is something very refreshing and I think very important for our economies, for our companies, for our countries. So when we talk to boards, CEOs, and owners, it's the level of excitement about using this to really drive value, right? To really drive impact is very important. I think the number 2 point here is, how do I make money out of this, right? Because one of the main things about GenAI and AI as a whole is the increase in productivity, right? And typically you get a lot of productivity when you have large labor pools, right? So what's the equation of productivity versus GenAI versus labor cost that makes this interesting? And many of them are thinking much more about how do I do more with what I have, rather than how do I start like taking labor out, which is also something very refreshing, right? I think the third thing we're seeing, given the dynamics of LATAM, is a lot of movements in mining, agriculture, commodities. Banks here have, hundreds of millions of clients in many cases, thousands of clients in many others, and the ability to relate differently to clients in terms of the customer service, in terms of going more digital, telcos as well, right? How do we take the best of the physical and the digital world? And there's a big push in LATAM to go in digital at a very accelerated pace. And GenAI is playing a big role there too. So I would think that those are 2 or 3 main tidbits on how LATAM is leading the way there.
And do you have any curious or interesting stories of implementations with a local flavor here?
Yeah, I think personally, but as QuantumBlack, we're working in all sectors. We're working in banking, we're working in stock exchanges, we're working in telco, insurance, mining, agriculture, retail. And if I had to tell one story that I think is quite amazing, I was working for a local bank in implementing AI to improve the productivity of software development, right? And we did the first pilots and it had immense results, 30 to 40% improvement in productivity. The developers were happy, the people in technology were happy. And then we said, okay, let's scale this up, right? And the moment we start scaling this up and we start even thinking and speaking about putting objectives, now all the human element comes to mind. What? I'm going to be measured by this, and I'm going to have my incentives change, and my bonuses are going to be changed. And people started to get nervous about it, right? And this is all where Alex was referring on the adoption and scaling. People forget that this, at the end of the day, is implemented by humans, and the human element is hugely important, right? So this example might apply in other geographies, but it's quite important that when we think about doing these things, we bring people on board from the very beginning, and the change management, adoption, risk management, scaling piece, it's life or death for these kind of technologies.
Pepe, just to build off that, I think one of the critical factors is that people element, right? At some point, some AI model or Gen AI model, some human's going to have to do something different, whether that be your employee, your customer, or some agent in between. Somebody's going to have to do something different. And getting human behavior change is really, really hard, right? It's easy to do it with 2 or 3 people. It's very hard to do it across hundreds or thousands of people. And that is a fundamental challenge between those that kind of create proof of concepts and those that can really scale and drive the level of impact that I think they aspire to have.
I reminded you saying about hybrid technology with human plus Gen AI, so the hybrid combination.
No, I think that's really important. And to complement Alex's point, two more things. One is, this change is not easy. I mean, there's a lot of impact potential, there's a lot of value potential, but it's hard. And it needs to start from the CEO and the board, right? It needs to start from the executive committee, it needs to start from the VPs. And it will all change. It would also change how CEOs work, how VPs work with the organization and in their own day-to-day, right? So there's also something about how do we make that top level, the top of the house, start using this and creating credibility and walking the talk, right? That this is really going to drive the next generation of impact and productivity and improvements, and how this cascades down into the organization, right? To me, this is also something that we've seen a lot. As Alex was saying, letting 1,000 flowers bloom without top-down support is very difficult for that change to be embraced and stick for a long time, right? And this hybrid thing is super important, this augmentation concept, the superhumans concept. We've heard many ways, but at the end of the day is, how do we make people do their jobs better and faster and with more productivity and really, apply our human logic and human skills where we really can make a difference, and not doing repetitive tasks like searching for documents and searching for paragraphs and reading very long reports to get one or two phrases, when we can have technology help us as a personal assistant, like a young trainee or something like that at this point in time. And we can be much more productive and use our time to think and create and do things that are really value added, right? And we can have these AI agents or chatbots or whatever helping us do other things much faster. And the last thing, as a client, right? How do I relate to companies differently? This is going to significantly change in the next few years, right? And the level of sophistication coming into the chatbots first, but now we're going to see next year and the years to come a generation of AI agents. They're going to help us do our job better. They're going to help us manage our calendar. They're going to help us manage our investments. They're going to help us connect with 3 banks. I mean, this is coming, right? So I think that augmentation concept and that complementarity and improvement, it's something that I'm very excited about.
When you think about the employee and back to your talent piece, when we've seen people implement AI, not just Gen AI, but AI, and they do it well, employee engagement and excitement actually goes up, not down. Because to your point, a lot of the repetitive and meaningless tasks that just take up worthless time goes away. And so it allows the employee to focus on the areas that they're most excited about, right? We all do a bunch of daily activities that if we could just have it go away, we'd love it, to allow us to focus on the things we actually enjoy. And so when we see this happening, you actually see an increase in employee engagement as well, which I think is part of the value proposition of going down this path of AI and generative AI.
Changing a little bit the subject, but you talked about successful implementations, and I would like to understand why do companies fail implementing and scaling GenAI? So the opposite situation.
Listen, I think it's the opposite of a lot of things we just said, but I would just say a couple of things. One is companies are building tech for tech's sake, so they're not focused on that business problem. What we saw a lot of in 2023 was there was so much excitement and passion around generative AI. People just started building things, and it didn't have a purpose at the end. And so I think building things for tech's sake is kind of failure mode number one. I'd say failure mode number two, particularly with generative AI, but even we saw it in traditional AI, is 1,000 flowers blooming typically doesn't work. And that's because this is a new technology, it is a new learning, there's data that matters, infrastructure that matters, data architecture that matters. And if everyone starts trying to build their own within an organization, it's very hard to standardize some of these things that really need to be standard. And in particular, you increase risk. So you want to manage the risk elements around generative AI on bias and so forth, or hallucinogens. And it's hard to do that when there's so many different elements going. And so I think that's kind of failure mode number two. And then the third one is, and Pepe mentioned it, without top team and CEO support, it's really, really hard, because not just AI, but Gen AI, it is absolutely a cross-functional solution that requires the tech folks to work with the business folks that work with the frontline folks, HR, finance, legal, risk, all play a role in this. And unless you have the top team aligned, it's really hard to orchestrate that cadre of people to work together in a seamless way.
Do you want to add anything, Pepe?
Yeah, I think not involving risk from the very beginning. So I've seen clients do this AI, Gen AI, work for 3-4 months, do these amazing things, and then they come to legal or compliance and say, sign off.
Oops.
And they're like, no, we need to understand, we need to analyze, So if we bring them to the table first and we bring them together with the business, we can shape together what this is going to look like, what are the legal and compliance implications, how do we work around them, and how do we get everyone comfortable that this is something we want to push, right? So I think that's another angle that is quite important. And I want to stress again one point about the focus, right? When things go well, it's because you focus on transforming an area or a domain or a piece of your business where you have significant impact. But then you need the focus, meaning also you need the budget. Because if you ask anyone in the C rooms today, do you want to invest in generative AI? Do you want to do generative AI? Do you see the potential? Everybody say, yes, yes, yes. Is it in your top priorities? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, that means budget. That is not going to go to other projects. That means devoting your best talent, not the talent that you just hired or the talent that might be some people that are not running the day-to-day and is people like do projects sometimes. It requires your best talent. And it requires you to really own the data, right? As a business, and treat data as a business asset, like you treat a manufacturing plant or you treat a logistics trucks or you treat a credit card, instead of treating it as a problem that someone else will fix, right? So the focus allows you to do all those things very well. And if you do the 1,000 flowers, getting all these three together and doing it tends to be very, very difficult.
You know, just on the best talent point, a little bit of a funny part of that is, you know, I often go to clients and it's hard for them to say, like, give us your very best talent. We need the very best. And the very best talent are usually doing very important things. Yeah. And so what I often say is, tell me the people you just can't live without. Who are the people that absolutely the company would not operate well if you didn't have them? And they'd say 3 or 4 people. I'm like, those are the 3 or 4 people we want. And those are who we want. And then they're like, oh no, I didn't mean it that way. But to get that conversation going, repositioning it as who are the people that just make the operations work. Those are the people that are so critical. To Pepe's point, not only do they have the knowledge of the organization, but they have the credibility. Exactly. And a lot of this requires, you know, believing in people who built something and trusting that you might not know all the answers, but you know if Pepe did it, then I have confidence to follow. And that's a really important dimension of the change that comes into place, not just from a solution perspective, but from like adoption perspective.
Yeah. You both talked about risk, which is very important. And Alex, hallucinate was the word of the year in 2023, according to the Cambridge Dictionary. So this is one of the risks associated, but of course it's not the only one. As we transition from pilots to scaling, how do these risks evolve and how to address them? You mentioned a few, but how to address them?
Yeah. Listen, I think risk, I'm going to change it from risks to a positive, which is, I think one of the great things that generative AI did was it increased the focus on risk and risk management from the board and the top team's perspective. Risk was always conceptually in the minds of anyone who was building AI and technology, but it was usually, not always, oftentimes relegated to the IT folks to think about risk. And now that generative AI came along and people recognize the potential issues of bias or hallucinogens or just wrong data and wrong information, it's really created a focus on managing risk. And so I'd say, you know, the risks aren't completely brand new, but they are similar to what used to live in AI, but they're just on steroids. They are much more prevalent, they're much more focused, and quite frankly, they're just more risky because all of a sudden, instead of only the technology folks focusing on AI, you can have any one of your employees go online and go to any of the open LLM models and do some queries that could really put your institution at risk. And so how do you educate your employees and get them focused is an important element. I do think, to be more pragmatic, you know, there isn't an organization that doesn't have like risk guidelines when it comes to AI and generative AI. And, you know, I've read a lot of these, and for the most part, they're all pretty similar. No one's going to say something dramatically different at kind of that one page of guiding principles level. But what I think really, where it really comes into play is when you take real examples and you put them against your guiding principles. And so say you pick a certain area that you're going to want to build a generative AI machine around, and it's got certain data elements that you want to use. And to Pepe's kind of earlier comment, having that conversation as you build the model is really important, because then the team will make yes or no decisions on whether to use that data or not. And then so underneath the guidelines, you start creating little dashes of decisions and examples of what you all did. And that way you're just basically codifying real risk decisions over time. And so you go from this kind of 10,000 foot motherhood and apple pie perspective of risk to actually pragmatic actions one can go take. And that will be a living and breathing document as it goes on. But I think that's an important way in how to start to bring high level risk concepts to actual like pragmatism.
Pepe, you mentioned digital trust. Do you want to add anything else or to this point?
I think as we move in these kind of new technologies, we usually talk about a 3 lines of defense model, in which the first line of defense is the business. The business has to manage its own risk, right? Second level of defense is risk or compliance. There's controlling that the business is doing the right things. And then the third one is audit, which is checking that the other two are doing their job, right? What we start seeing with technologies is that the second line of defense starts to be much more closer to the first line to help them shape together what are the controls and the risk management things that I have to do when I build a chatbot or when I build a coding copilot, right? And how do I make sure that the data that is going in and the applications of that and the security of that is built by design with all these risk guidelines and not having risk as a second line, like looking at what others did, and obviously it's not going to be right? So this role of risk to be more coaching and advising and involved with the first line to help them do a better job, I think is quite important.
And Pepe, you mentioned the possible new advancements of GenAI. I would like to ask for you too, what kind of examples or what kind of things we should see this year regarding GenAI, like new things, new features, or what can we expect?
I caveat with anything I say today, I have the right to change my mind in like 3 months. Because
whatever
we say, I promise
you
will not be 100% accurate. Listen, I think if I had 2 predictions, it would be one, generative AI will continue to increase in speed and accuracy. There is every day, every week, every month, we're seeing these models get better and better. And that is, and not the same player, like different players will increase here and different players will increase there. And so I think in 2024 and into 2025, I think we'll continue to see that level of accuracy and speed continue to rise. That I have lots of confidence in. The second thing I think we're going to see is more players coming in the market and out of the market. And what I mean by that is there will be, I think there will be more sector or function specific solutions.
To add to what Alex just said, one is I think this is going to be the next 2 years, the era of the corporate adoption. We saw last year like ChatGPT and other applications gaining traction, the fastest ever application being used. I think now we're going to see the wave going to corporates and corporations to use that in a more frequent and sustainable way. And from a application standpoint, we are going to see a shift from the GPT dialogue kind of thing to agents that can do things for us, right?
Copilots.
So it can be an agent that is helping us organize my life. It can be a personal assistant. It can be an agent that you tell them, create an app to do this, and the agent will create the app. It's not going to write the code, it's going to create the app and run it. It can be an agent that's going to be negotiating my travel fares with all the different sites. It can be an agent that can be negotiating for me and my banks, how much they're going to charge me for something. So this is coming on, and if you look, I was in Silicon Valley last week, and a lot of the activity is coming on the agent side as well, right? So this is a new thing we're going to be seeing more on the technology side coming forward.
Alex and Pepe, unfortunately, we are reaching the end of our session. It was an incredible conversation here. And I would like to ask you to leave a final message for our audience. So if you can start.
I'll leave where I started, which is as you think of the journey on generative AI, focus on what's the business problem you're trying to solve, and get really focused and prioritized around what are the big issues or challenges your customers or your institutions facing, and then figure out what role technology, AI, and GenAI play in solving that problem.
Great. And Pepe, how about you?
Highly complementary to what Alex said, just thinking about this human AI collaboration, augmentation, I think is going to be crucial.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming. And I hope, Alex, you have an amazing time here in Brazil. And Pepe, I hope to see you soon here at McKinsey Talks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
GenAI is such a complex and fascinating topic that new reflections arise every day. Do you have any questions that you would like to ask our experts? Write to us at mckinsey-talks@mckinsey.com. And don't forget to answer our survey and share with us your thoughts on this episode. To do so, simply access the QR code that appears on your screen or follow the link in the episode description. You can also find the McKinsey Talks website in the description of this episode. Thank you very much for being with us and see you soon.